I have had the honor and the pleasure of being an art teacher for a very long time now, approaching decades. And as such, I've had a chance to work with artists from every walk of life, from bare bones beginner to master professionals. And one of the conversations that keep coming up time and time again is, where am I on my artistic journey? That answer might not be entirely clear, but I think that after this many years and after this many conversations, this many portfolios, these thousands and thousands of beautiful works of art that I've had a chance to help artists build and develop, I've got a pretty good eye for where people are in their artistic journey, and furthermore, where they might go with their art journey moving forward, what type of artists they may become. Because not all artists are made the same, and not all artists are designed for the same type of work. And through every stage of an artist's journey, from the beginning to the end, what I hope you'll learn, what I've discovered, is that every stage is equally important, even the most fundamental one, at an age where you don't even think you're really doing anything important. You're just being a nerd. So that first stage would be the child stage. And that's a stage that almost everybody has, save the odd few. Most kids express themselves visually quite well, quite candidly. In fact, this is one of the reasons why art therapy for children can be so powerful, because if somebody has the gift to be able to read and interpret children's art, they can actually gain insights into the child's mind and their experiences in ways that perhaps a therapist or a conversation might not. So if you are a parent of a child who might be going through some heavy stuff in their life, and you want to gain a little bit more insight into their thought process, then that might be a venue worth exploring. Now, during that child phase, what type of artists are we? Well, we are very expressive, very candid ones who capture information that matter to us. Usually art at that phase, when you're working with little kids who are drawing things, they're generally going to let you know what is immediately interesting and important to them. Maybe it's Kirby. Maybe it's their pets. Maybe it's school. Maybe it's their parents. Maybe it's that cool car they saw down the street. It depends. But they're generally very unfiltered and very direct with the way they express themselves. What you might not be realizing, however, is that that is a foundational process. That is the young artist connecting themselves, even at ages as young as 3, 4, 5 years old, as they're young enough to hold a crayon or a pencil in their hand. They're starting to develop a sense of self-expression. They're starting to create connections with themselves psychologically that are very, very important. They're starting to let you know what their tastes are, what their focuses are, what their interests are on a very personal level. However, fast forward a little bit later on in their life, and maybe to the ages of 7, 8, 9, once they start to approach the end of elementary school or primary school, this is when you slowly start to see some kids lose interest. Some might be more into math, some might be more into sports. However, there is the odd few that might really show an affinity for and an interest in art, and I happen to be one of those kids. I really didn't start to discover the fact that I had some artistic identity until it was later on in my elementary school years. I was the kid who kept drawing and kept caring and kept building his sketchbook when everybody else did it less or abandoned it altogether. And I would argue that this is probably one of the most important phases in an artistic life, and a phase that we're going to revisit many years later. Okay, I call this the total nerd phase, the absolute nerd in us, because we can draw a little bit better. We have a little bit more confidence in what we're producing. but we're starting to catalog artists, artwork, designs, cartoons, themes, movies, etc. that are personal to us. We're not just drawing what the teacher told us to draw. We're drawing what we care about, and we're starting to show personal interest, and we're nerding out with it. We're at this beautiful state of expressiveness, but ignorance, where we don't question the quality of our artwork. We don't compare ourselves so much to other people. We're just completely nerding out. However, if that artist continues to draw, if they continue to develop their skills into high school, for instance, this is where self-consciousness starts to kick in. This is where public image starts to seep in. This is where social pressures and peer pressure and fitting into a society really starts to become a big deal to us. And arguably, this might be a time where we either push and develop our artistic skills, because that is a fundamental part of our artistic identity, as it was for me in high school. I used to draw on people's jeans. I drew tattoos on people's legs. I would draw by pouring sugar all over a coffee table in a restaurant and using my knife to carve designs in the sugar on the table. I used to piss off the owners of the restaurants quite a bit, but I did it anyways. Where they start being called the artist. That's why I would call this phase the, quote, school artist. At that point in my life, when I was in high school and I was the guy who kept drawing and started to develop my skills to a point where people were saying, hey, this guy can really draw. It started to become a part of my identity, that people started to refer to me as, quote, Adam, the artist. That was a title that I was very proud of, and I really showed off. And I would argue that that was something that really helped to propel me moving forward, because that kind of recognition mattered to me. And I was honored to be the kid who sat outside in the cold and did a sketch of the front of my high school when I was graduating that year for the yearbook. It was my art in the front page of it. I was very proud of that. That's the school artist. However, following high school, now the artist, now the individual, is for the first time in their life granted a choice on what type of education they want to pursue, college and or university. And that's when we become the art student. Not the school artist, the art student. Because now what we're doing is we're starting to think to ourselves, I might want to make a living out of this. This is something that has been a fun hobby and an identity of mine through high school. But now I'm thinking, what if I could push this into becoming a career? And this is very often when social friction and personal friction starts to come into the picture. However, it's not entirely crippling, because you might find yourself as well in an environment, in an ecosystem full of like-minded artists. Because you're in school, you're surrounded by people that are just art students, and you feed off of each other's passion and you feed off of each other's skill. And I would say that this is very often when we grow a lot. I remember watching my daughter go through college, getting her college diploma and going to her vernissage, going to her art exhibit at the end of her year, and seeing all of the artworks of all these other students. And I was floored by just how this vast range of talent. And you could really tell how all that competition, all that exposure, all of that daily drawing and being immersed in this artistic environment really helped to fuel their development artistically. However, they might be getting pressure from parents who might not be so supportive of an artistic career. They might be getting pressure from friends or family that might be pursuing more lucrative, more stable careers, like law, like communications, like architecture, like engineering, for instance. So they're starting to have to defend their position as artists, and or, if the pressure's a little bit too heavy, potentially abandon their pursuits and pursue something else because, hey, I want to have a family, I want to buy a home, I want to buy a car, I want to make a living for myself, and I just can't see myself doing that on an art salary. It might not be worth it. Some people decide at that point, I don't care if I make a career. I'm going to make a career doing something completely different. However, it's important enough to me to continue to develop my artistic skills musically, visually, photographically, video, whatever. It doesn't matter. But they want to do it as a hobby. They want to make their money somewhere else. That way the pressure of a career is taken off the table and now they can just focus on their artistic growth and their artistic joy. And I have many students who right off the bat will tell me, I don't want a career in this. I'm doing this purely for myself, and it has zero impact on their artistic education because passion is passion. And if you immerse yourself in your artistic endeavors, that's all that matters. Growth will find itself if you continue to do it. Just keep drawing, as I said in my last video. There's something else that also starts to seep in at a certain point. Following that education, the artist puts their portfolio together, they start to build their CV, and they start to really research, how do I get a job with this skill? Up until this point, I've been doing everything for free. I've been doing it pro bono. I've been doing it for passion purposes. I've been doing it as an educational thing. They may have invested money into their own education, but they haven't necessarily made any money. So there's several things that kick in at this point. And I would argue that this phase in an artist's career is probably the most insecure and the most stressful. And I would call that the, quote, young professional. Because number one, you haven't learned how to demand a salary for your work. It's very difficult to sell something you've been giving away for a long time. That's a bit of a psychological hurdle that some artists have to get over. Not only asking money for their work, expecting money for their work, but also negotiating a fair salary, not some giveaway salary. It's a bit of a psychological hurdle and something that I would definitely recommend that artist consult with a professional about if they're not sure, to get a gauge on what a reasonable salary is and what different type of art careers, what kind of salaries are associated with different types of art careers. It's important to know what the industry generally pays for different types of work, because either A, you sell yourself short and you don't ask enough and you get a little bit exploited, or B, you over-demand. You might come across as a little bit entitled and thinking you're worth more than you might actually be. And that's very much situational. It depends on the job. It depends on your skills. It depends on your focus. There's many different types of art careers out there. However, the other thing that's also happening is you've built those technical skills. You have gone to school. You've learned those fundamentals that all good schools teach, those building blocks of creating great art. But what you might start realizing at that point in your artistic career is, and it's all happening simultaneously, is, okay, I went from being a nerd to learning technical skills and now having a more professional portfolio, a more technically strong portfolio. However, I feel like there's something lacking. Perhaps I might be feeling a lack of identity, a lack of uniqueness. I don't feel like I stand out enough. And that insecurity in the fact that your art is not catching, it's not getting enough attention, it doesn't feel unique enough, is very often where our vulnerabilities exist. Number one, I'm comparing myself to all these other professionals, not taking into consideration that other professional I'm comparing myself to is a 30-year professional when I'm a 2-year professional. So it's not a fair comparison. And I've made videos in the past that you can check out for yourself where we make these unreasonable comparisons of ourselves in unfair ways. I'm just comparing my 2nd year to somebody's 20th year. And because we're both on the same platform, we're both on the same social media, that makes us think that we're on equal playing grounds when in fact you're not. It's a bad gauge for skill. I would also argue that because you're vulnerable, because you haven't had a salary yet, because you haven't yet found that niche into the market where you can find some kind of stability artistically, which is normal for every artist, by the way, this is when the threat of outside forces are their strongest. And I'm talking specifically about things like, in my early days of my career, 3D animation. I was a traditional animator, and 3D animation came into the mix. That was a huge kick in the gut to my lifetime of drawing practice. Prior to that, it probably would have been around the turn of the 19th century when photography started to become mainstream. That must have been a real kick in the gut to all of those oil painters and those sketch artists. Fast forward to today, and we're facing yet another existential threat. Artificial intelligence and generated imagery that we see popping up all over the place. I can tell you from first-hand knowledge, speaking to seasoned professionals who've been doing this for a decade or two or three, like myself, versus talking to artists in their late teens, but particularly early 20s to 30s, like my daughter, who's a young professional as well. They have zero bandwidth, zero tolerance for anything that even remotely resembles the essence of the letters A and I. It is off the table altogether. And there's no bending, there's no compromise to that. And that makes absolute sense. You haven't made a name for yourself yet. You haven't found your niche yet. And here comes this technology that does all the work for you. That's exactly how 3D completely knocked me on my ass for a little while. And it took me years to recuperate from that and kind of suck it up and take it and find a way to adapt myself to the industry and finally get a chance to be able to draw again. And I've been doing that ever since. And I did work in 3D. I did adapt myself to that climate for a little while, but very quickly realized that there was no satisfaction long-term for me as an artist. And I made the decision to go back to 2D, and I've been doing that ever since. That's what I specialize in. And it was very wonderful to return back to my traditional roots and abandon these Bezier curves and this skinning and rigging and all that crap. I really didn't have much use for it whatsoever. This is when we're the most sensitive. This is where I would say to you artists, you young professionals, this is where you really need to isolate yourself in your little happy little ignorant ecosystem of drawing and don't look outside of that bubble. Because if you do, life can be very discouraging, politically, professionally, etc. And the artists that I see quickly and effectively get over that phobia, get over that insecurity, which is there for absolutely valid reasons. I completely support your phobia. But the people who get over that are the people who stay protected in their creative bubble and just stick to their guns and keep doing what they're doing. My daughter is a testament to that. The comic book she's working on, she's starting to learn tattoo art. Yes. Which was really cool. She's actually got her tattoo gun and she's been practicing. I can't wait. You're going to see a lot of her art on my arms in the near future. I'm very excited for that. She doesn't think about it. She just draws. And when all of that negativity comes in and all of those headlines on YouTube come in about AI stealing our life and we're all going to die in the next 15 minutes, ignore it. Absolutely ignore it. Don't be ignorant to the facts. Don't be an enabler necessarily, but don't let that cripple your artistic growth. This is the most sensitive. This is the turning point in a lot of artists' careers. And this is very sadly where a lot of these artists, these very talented, aspiring professionals, give in to their fears and quit. If you do, I won't hold it against you. Nobody will. But if you don't, you have something wonderful waiting for you. Because next comes the senior professional. The one who now has a rhythm, is starting to get this industry experience. Maybe you're working in trading cards. Maybe you're working in video games or film. Maybe you're doing concept art. Maybe you're doing illustration. Maybe you're an independent artist, etc. Maybe you're a fine artist. It's at this point that you have found a niche. You're starting to get really good. People are starting to notice you. You're starting to get a very good sense of where you fit into this industry as a professional. And you're starting to gain some momentum. You're starting to get a paycheck. You're starting to be able to pay your bills. You can buy your cat a cute little bow. You can do all these really cool things. And that confidence starts to build. And you can maintain this momentum with expected hiccups like getting laid off, losing your job, getting rehired, getting a promotion, getting a demotion, having to do a side job just to pay your bills because there's no art jobs and you work in a grocery store, and then you get that art job again. And this is when you really learn to adapt and innovate and bring in different types of technology, different types of processes, adapt maybe your style, your approach, the theme of your work, etc. And you're really starting to refine yourself into a cohesive vision. That's when it's happening, the senior professional. However, for very interesting reasons, many of my students at my mentorship are senior professionals. They've worked at Bungie, they've worked at Electronic Arts, they've worked at Blizzard, they've worked for Kojima. I've worked with students all over the planet that have done all kinds of amazingly good things that I envy as careers. And I find them sitting with me in private, taking a mentorship with me. Why? They already made it. They're already there. Well, it's because they haven't entirely made it yet. It's because at that phase in their career, in that phase in their growth, they realize that they've built the tools and they know how to market themselves and they do have a sense of direction. However, that may have come at a little bit of a cost of their own integrity. That might have come at the cost of them giving something up that they now regret. And they're revisiting why they got into art in the first place and might be asking themselves the question, why don't I feel satisfied with my art anymore? Why am I longing for something bigger and better? Is it because they just get bored and they want novelty? No, it's because they know that the whole reason they got into art in the first place was because they were nerds. And they're not nerding out anymore. Now they're producing a service for somebody, for a client, for a director, whatever. And they might feel a little bit too alienated from themselves, and they feel that they were meant for something bigger and better as artists. And they come to me, or any of these other amazing schools or mentorships out there, to figure out what that is and how to get it back. And this is where one of the biggest, most beautiful, most rewarding phases of an art career happen. And that is what I call the, quote, reborn artist. This is where an artist has confidence in their skills. They don't need to prove themselves anymore. They know what great art is, and they know how to make it consistently. This is where the artist comes full circle, all the way back to the very early beginnings of their artistic journey. And they remind themselves, why did I get in this in the first place? Why did I start drawing in the first place? And they skip right over all of those academic years, those professional years, and they come back to that fundamental and ask themselves the question, what's cool to me? I want to be somebody who can just express a cool thought, an emotional thought. I want to just express to you something fundamental to me as a human being, be it funny, be it whimsical, be it dark and terrifying and creepy, be it really, really cool and sci-fi, be it beautiful and magical and colorful. And I want to just express that artistically with the hands of a professional, but through the minds of a child. And this is where Picasso's famous quote comes in. I'm paraphrasing here because I can't remember specifically. It took me 20 years to learn how to paint like a master. It took me the rest of my life to learn how to paint like a child. That's where that comes from. He made that realization. Who is the nerd Picasso? I look at what I draw today, all this dark Soulsian, creepy, creature, horror-based, bloodborne-y stuff, and I just feel so much nerdy, childlike joy in what I produce, because I can now finally live up to the vision that I did as a child, but capture that information through the skills of a professional. And that's the phase that I find myself in right now. However, I feel that there's one true phase waiting for me moving forward, and that is the master. The master is where everything that I have developed, everything that's been an influence and has been a lesson and has been a realization throughout my life, all culminate into the most fluid expression of self artistically. I'm not there yet, but I can feel it's up ahead. This is going to be the moment as an artist that I know, and I've experienced this in little doses throughout my artistic career. It's going to be a moment of absolute artistic liberty, a moment of absolute artistic relief. If I could compare it to dancing, I remember going to a salsa dance night once, and I was a member of a dance troupe and we were dancing choreographies and everything like that. But this night, the music just hit right. I had endless energy. The temperature, the music, the atmosphere, the people, everything was just perfect. And I just felt, it was almost like a dream where I felt like my body just knew exactly what to do. It was like all of a sudden I became 20 times the dancer I ever thought I was. It was this absolute moment of euphoria. And I've had little glimpses of that as an artist as well. But as we approach our most mature years, if we don't give up on our dreams, this is when it just becomes us. It becomes you. Your art is entirely a manifestation of your entire being. And I can't wait to experience that, because I know it's going to be amazing. And that, to me, is what keeps motivating me to keep growing, even though I've been doing this for decades, even though I've been teaching this for decades, even though I've been through all these professional phases in my artistic career. I have so much to look forward to, because I don't truly feel like I'm a complete artist yet. And that frustration and that excitement really propels me moving forward. No matter what phase in your artistic career you're in, every one of them matters. Every one of them means something, and every one of them is completely necessary. So you let me know in the comments below, where do you feel you are in your artistic journey? I'm very curious, and I would love to hear feedback. I'd love to hear messages from artists of all ages, from 5 years old to 105. I'd love to hear where you are in your artistic journey. Sound good? With that said, I love you all with all my heart, and happy painting. Take care.